Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this first session after the plenary. My name is Carrie Seltzer. I'm the head of engagement for iNaturalist. And just to give you a brief session overview, we are going to have half of our presenters physically here, and half of our presentations are virtual. And I'm crossing my fingers that those virtual presentations work. So just a warning, we might have to make some changes on the fly, but as much as possible, we'll try to keep to the schedule and the agenda that you see in the program. But if we have to deviate, that's probably why. So I'm really grateful to all of the speakers and all of the attendees, both here physically as well as those who are attending virtually. Everyone who is presenting in this session is sharing a different story of how iNaturalist and iNaturalist data is making change in the world for biodiversity, increasing our understanding of biodiversity, or even changing things on the ground. So I'm going to start off with a presentation that's a sort of visionary presentation with some ideas for ways that we might be able to take what's possible with iNaturalist even further. And I'm really curious to hear the ideas and feedback that come from all of you. The general plan right now is to have questions for everyone at the end. We have scheduled 30 minutes for discussion. So write your questions down so that you remember them. If we happen to be running ahead of time, we might be able to take a few questions for the presenters who are physically here in person. My understanding is that anyone who's watching online, we unfortunately won't be able to see any questions that you have, and you'll just have to reach out to the various presenters separately. So let's see if this works. First of all, I want to provide some context about what iNaturalist is, but I always love to ask a little bit of the audience first. So I would love to know who already uses iNaturalist, the data, or maybe you're making your own observations. Okay, that's a lot of hands. All right, so now I'm going to ask the reverse. Who's not using iNaturalist? Okay, I only saw one, but that's cool because I'm going to start with remind everyone of the sort of big picture of how iNaturalist works. And it is that we've got millions of people out there using our mobile apps, using the iNaturalist website to make observations of the things they encounter. Then when they post it to iNaturalist, that observation is shared with a community of people, many of whom, though many fewer than are making observations, many people are contributing identifications and crowdsourcing that identification process. And collectively, the iNaturalist community is crowdsourcing the world's most diverse current set of biodiversity. So let's talk about it by the numbers. We've got 280 million verifiable observations now. Those are of more than 500,000 unique taxa, which, if you're doing the math, that's about 25% of the world's described species so far. Of those taxa, over 100,000, we have enough data to be able to do some modeling about those taxa. It takes roughly, it's about 50 observations that we need in order to start modeling. What do we do with those models? First, it started just with visual similarity. If anybody's used the iNaturalist app or perhaps Seek, who are the Seek fans in the audience? Whoa, very few of you. That's so surprising. I guess given this audience, it's not that surprising since you all love data. And iNaturalist was designed more than Seek was designed to collect biodiversity data. But even within the iNaturalist app, you may have experienced it, the suggestion of what species you might be looking at based on visual similarity. But we also started adding geospatial modeling to those predictions. So it's not only based on visual similarity, it's also based on geospatial distributions. And just earlier this year, we started sharing those geographic distributions for these 100,000 species as range maps on iNaturalist as well. So we also share a subset of this data with GBIF. Right now, it's about 131 million observations. I couldn't easily get the number of taxa, but it's a subset. There's almost 7,000 citations of iNaturalist data just from the data shared with GBIF. And what this means is that when it comes to recent GBIF data, like since 2020, most data from most species comes from iNaturalist. So 54% of species, at least 54% of species get at least 58. Man, I really botched that. Just read this slide. The words are there. So we're talking about a lot of data, a big community. I didn't even put the number of people here. It's almost 4 million people who are contributing these observations. And we know you're going to hear many examples of how this data is having impact in the world. But I want to focus on some very local examples and describe how we might be able to make iNaturalist even more useful in this context. So this is a woman named Heather Holm. She is an author of many books about pollinators, and she has been contributing, making many observations on iNaturalist. And in particular, she has put a lot of attention to a local park in her community that was full of invasive species. And she worked with the community, and they have removed the invasive species, replanted native species, and they're using iNaturalist to track the increase in biodiversity that's visiting as a result of their restoration efforts. So how could we make it easier for lots of small place-based projects to do something like this, to know, for example, maybe what species should we even be thinking about as restoration targets? So I'm going to use an example here from Chicago. This is the North Park Village Nature Center in Chicago. They did a BioBlitz. They found over 600 species in their BioBlitz. This is a very urban context. You can see it's surrounded by a lot of buildings. And based on the modeling that we're doing for those 100,000 plus species that we've got enough data to model geospatially and visually, we can look at how many of those species we think, just based on purely based on their range, how many of those might occur at this park in Chicago. And it's 13,000 species. And there's highlighted here some of the more conspicuous examples of a trillium, a nice little herbaceous flower, a fly, a butterfly, and a prairie plant. So now we're back to looking at the species. So I want to emphasize these are things that were not found in the BioBlitz. But if we look back at the species that are found in the broader area of iNaturalist, which of them might be charismatic enough to be indicators of presence? Because we know that there's bias in what people decide to observe, and it's not going to be a very good indicator species if it's really hard to document. So if we eliminate the species from here that are either not good indicators of either high quality habitat or are just going to be too difficult to observe, we have a reduced subset of species here. And that was essentially sort of some of the result of assigning species sensitivity from low to high for many of the species that we could predict would occur in that area. So a species like the spotted lanternfly, which is increasingly spreading in North America as an invasive species, not specific at all. It'll live anywhere. Northern cardinal, white, common, and adaptable as well. But then at the extreme, we've got something like a salamander, right? It's forest dependent. It's a much more sensitive species. And then we've got something like the box turtle that is long lived, can't really deal with a highly fragmented urban habitat. So each of these species then gets a sensitivity score. And if we adapt a standard protocol, something like the IUCN STAR, to then apply presence absence for each of these species that could occur in the area. And then we can use this to calculate an ecosystem health index and identify restoration targets that might be appropriate for a place like the North Park Community Center in Chicago. And here, sorry, there's the score. And these species are the ones that could be predicted to occur in that space and therefore might be ones that they want to target. Box turtle's a tricky one, but some of these others, especially the plants, might be good candidates. And if they are successful in reestablishing those species in this area, then it would improve their ecosystem health index score. So here's another place where this could, another example that we pulled. This is a BioBlitz in Belize that some students did. They're focused on restoring a degraded creek on their campus and species that might be appropriate targets for them to try to bring back. These all happen to be animals that could be attracted through attention to improving the plant habitat or perhaps the water quality in those spaces. A butterfly, a tree frog, and an odonate. Or here, this is an example of someone who has been rewilding their lawn. They're getting rid of their monoculture and turning it into a natural area. So what might this homeowner look at as target species to try and attract to their restored habitat? A red-banded hairstreak, perhaps the pickerel frog, or this yellow-backed Delafria, which looks like a bee, but I'm wondering if it might be a bee mimic fly. Someone out there probably knows. Showing my ignorance here. So when you work at scale, when you're well-funded, you probably have tools like this at your disposal. But we're interested in how iNaturalist might be able to develop tools like this that can be used by a homeowner, could be used by a community group, could be used by a school to help make some decisions and fill this gap. So we're interested to hear in the discussion later if this would be useful for you, in what context, what would make it more useful, and invite you to think about this as a tool in all of the use cases that other folks present. All right. Thank you, everyone. And next, I'm pleased to introduce Corey Callahan.
Hello. To start by introducing myself. My name's Corey. I wear an iNaturalist hat, but I do not work for them. I just bug carry a lot. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida in the Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation. And I'm going to be talking about interesting. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about a review paper that we recently had published investigating how iNaturalist data are being used in the literature. So everybody's familiar with iNaturalist. I'm not going to go into that, but I just, there's two things that I'm going to be talking about. iNaturalist, obviously that's the session, and then also GBIF. Carrie briefly mentioned this, but one way that they are currently tracking how iNaturalist data are used are through these GBIF citations. And so this is like the cite the DOI, right? And so we're going to get into that a little bit. And so I've really, I'm a fairly obsessive iNet user myself. And so this was almost like a pet project of like, just wanted to know how these data are being used. And I kind of want to know, like, personally, when I submit an observation, like, what does that actually do? Where does it go? Who uses the data? How is it being used? And there's lots of examples. There's lots of published papers that like kind of often make the news. Rediscovery of moths and butterflies, This one, if you have never checked out, this is probably one of the best comment threads on all of iNaturalist. So this was somebody was hiking in China, photographed a bee mimicking stiletto fly, put up a photo. Someone's like, "Whoa, that's new." A couple years goes by, they actually named it after the person that found it, and it was described as a new species to science. There's lots of other examples. So looking at mallard stripe size and prominence in peregrine falcons. So kind of looking at some of the imagery itself. And then you have like, those are kind of like small examples. Then you have these like scaling up to these global examples where you're looking at plant observations across the globe, kind of global trait patterns using iNaturalist plus other data sets. And there's heaps, right? Like more and more. And so for me, like in this space academically, I'd get my Google Scholar alerts and like, okay, there's a lot, but how much? And like, what are they actually doing and how are they advancing the scientific field? So we set out to look at a quantitative look at this, like kind of a systematic review paper. And this was like partly mimicked off a paper that did this for GBIF a couple of years ago. That looked at how the GBIF increase has taken place and how that enables global biodiversity science. And I thought this was a good idea. It turns out it was a lot of work, which is probably why nobody had done it before. So we had to pull in a lot of global authors, some of whom are in the room, and kind of like to really kind of go through and tag team this and actually get the data out of the articles. And we immediately realized we were a little bit in over our heads, and we just typed in iNaturalist to Google Scholar, which it's a pretty like niche term. So like there's not going to be a lot of other things that are mentioned in iNaturalist unless they're at least tangentially related to the platform itself. There's over 11,000 hits. And so we're like, oh crap, like, is this a stupid idea? But we plugged along and we ended up getting that down to about 6,500. We went through those. We ended up with 2,000, just over 2,000 articles that we manually tagged and went through. Hence, we had to bring in a lot of authors. You know, we looked at study area, topic, taxonomy, and then how the data are being used. When we first did this, we sat down and we had like 17 different article topics and realized that would be too cumbersome. So we ended up collapsing it into these 8, and we used other as this like catch-all category. And then, as I mentioned, we also went to GBIF to try to get like the GBIF data using the API to see any paper that had cited GBIF that used iNaturalist observations and pulled that into our analysis as well. Now, one interesting note here, just before I jump into the results, we only found that 10% of articles between our like manual tagging and then the GBIF cite the DOI approach were overlapping. So there's a lot of articles that are being published and peer-reviewed manuscripts that weren't found just purely from the GBIF approach. So here's some of the data. You can see the number of iNaturalist articles, the number of GBIF articles. So those are numbers of peer-reviewed articles through time, both increasing and unsurprisingly following the trend of the number of iNaturalist observations, right? So as more iNaturalist observations are kind of shared with the global biodiversity information and availability, more papers are being published. Here it is taxonomically. We found 128 different countries had published a paper using iNaturalist data from within that country. So this is the number of articles per country, and it kind of shows the similar trends, like bias towards the global north, kind of bias towards where most scientific articles are being published from. But what we did next is we looked at how those differ when you look at the proportional difference using the number of observations given, so the number of published articles given the number of observations. And what you see is actually like, so this blue means that more articles than expected are published using iNaturalist data, given the number of observations. You can see in a lot of countries, like this is becoming very proportionally more important, right? Where there aren't a lot of standardized biodiversity monitoring frameworks, it's proportionally more important. Taxonomically, 638 taxonomic families have been published using iNaturalist data, right? So that's like a fairly pervasive spread across the tree of life. Insects, plants are the top 2. Birds are down there a little bit. That's probably because eBird exists. So I think most people would go to eBird. There's some stuff missing, like fishes, other like ocean, organisms are missing. And then we did the same thing proportionally. So anything below has more articles than expected, given the proportion of iNaturalist observations, and anything above is less. So again, you see kind of like amphibia, mammalia. More articles are published using these than you would be expected. Another key finding is over 50% of articles that published using iNaturalist data were focused on 3 or fewer taxonomic entities. So like very kind of a very heavy bias towards species-centric approach. We stopped at 3. If there was more than 3, we classified it as like unknown, but we only classified 3 or less, and then we pulled out the actual species names if that was the case. And here's how they're actually being used. This is a word cloud of about 2,500 articles and the titles. And so you'll notice distribution, new, conservation, climate change, first. And so, most of the way that iNaturalist data are being used are kind of in species distribution and range expansions. There's a lot of papers that are of the form of this is the first record of this species for this maybe geopolitical boundary or this ecozone or whatever it might be. That's a large proportion of the articles being used. But there's some on biology, species discovery. So this is like that example that I gave earlier, that kind of new species discovered to science where iNaturalist was an aid. So that's like, that's there, it's increasing. Next is the data type. So here we have observation data. So those are like the spatiotemporal coordinates, the what, when, where that's being used. That's the predominant use of the iNaturalist data. But imagery, which I'll come back to in a second. And again, species distribution was the most common, followed by descriptive. So descriptive would be of that form of like, this is the first record. And then the data role, I think, is really important. So, we classified it 3 ways: minor, major, or main. And so minor would basically be like somebody's fitting an SDM, and then they just grab the iNat data to kind of like help fill in gaps, right? And so that's the most common use of iNaturalist data right now. It's just like that complementarity. But a significant number are also, the main data source where only iNaturalist data is used. And then major data source was this like subjective category where it's like they used other data sources, but it was mostly iNaturalist data being used. And I wanted to return to this. So this, I think scientists have really focused for a while on this like spatiotemporal coordinates, right? Like the what, when, where. But more and more, we're finding that the proportion of imagery being used is increasing through time. So there's a lot of things that can be unlocked, thinking about species interactions, different networks that you can develop from those. And I think that we saw as a trend through time. And I think that's going to just take off as some of these AI and LLMs are developed. So big picture, this was a lot of work, but we found over 5,000 publications that use iNaturalist data. Unfortunately, so this was just published in July. The analysis ended in 2022. And so like it's super out of date already, and it's really annoying to admit. But in the last 5 years, we found a 10-fold increase in the use of iNaturalist in the literature. And in 2022, there were 4 articles published a day using iNaturalist to at least some extent. We did some very back of the envelope calculations, and we estimated it's like 8.5 in 2025. Very back of the envelope, but we tried to like catch up to try to that. And then it's really quite pervasive, right? 128 countries across 638 taxonomic families have used iNaturalist data to publish scientific research. I think I'm out of time, but I think the most important thing to me is like iNaturalist is democratizing data collection. They do an awesome job of providing this like global platform with local accessibility and local adaptability to allow for many different scientific questions to be answered. And I think it's just going to take off, and I'm really curious to hear what people think about this. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Our next presentation should be virtual. And so I'm getting the signal it's ready. And so I think they are going to queue it up. It is by Pasindu from Sri Lanka.
The studies at home of multiple college is being based on Australian guys to determine example. What is Pascal from Sri Lanka, and I'm today presenting you from an ecosystem in transition. The studies at home of multiple college is being based on everyone. It's Pascal from Sri Lanka, and I'm today presenting you from Pixels to Policy, piloting iNaturalist as a scalable tool for biological monitoring in rapidly urbanizing environments. So imagine trying to document biodiversity in a landscape that's vanished right before your eyes. That's exactly what we faced in home of Sri Lanka, and iNaturalist became an essential tool to capture an ecosystem in transition. The studies at Hormigam Multinational College is within West of Sri Lanka, lies 20 kilometers away from Colombo, was a rural agricultural landscape of paddy and coconut fields, and with scattered forests is now rapidly transforming into a ruined city with forest fragments being cleared and habitat loss in real time. As you can see in the graphs, by 2030, over 60% of people will live in cities driven by the decline. In Sri Lanka, urbanization threats are compounded by data gaps and low public participation in biodiversity monitoring. So our objectives were clear: test whether citizen teams can produce credible biodiversity baselines in urbanized areas and map favorable diversity across microhabitats to identify conservation priorities, and three, pilot a practical monitoring framework aligned with national biodiversity targets. Acres of the site includes grasslands, remnant trees, drainage lines, and build-up areas. For 3 days, including one night survey, we applied a parallel hybrid method. An expert survey track uses systematic concepts and specialized techniques, and citizen science track, where trained students conduct visual surveys and uploaded observations to iNaturalist, simply a Babis, and this design enabled real-time validation of citizen science data for extremely local monitoring capacity. Expectations: just in 3 days, 188 faunal species were documented in the greater suburban dam, with 155 records uploaded to iNaturalist. All the species were documented there, which created a global accessible dataset, and the surveys revealed high insect diversity, followed by birds, reptiles, alongside smaller groups like snails and millipedes. This highlights a surprisingly rich community, including both visible and cryptic, and thriving in this distant urban landscape. You can see these photos. Simply, these are the evidences of the biodiversity there. Simply, the standard survey recorded 110 species, while citizen science recorded 155, with 77 overlapping and 78 unique to citizen science and 33 unique to standard service. Citizens captured all insects because students recorded all observable insects, while experts focused only butterflies and ornaments. Standard survey, in contrast, detect more cryptic and nocturnal species like reptiles, amphibians, and some mammals. This raised public awareness, created an open access dataset, and established a baseline for future comparisons. Combining iNaturalist and standard survey data revealed biodiversity rich zones. You can see it, map A, and with 5 priority areas identified for conservation, map B, and you can see the area 2, which is the school garden, emerged as the most species rich and is now a long-term monitoring site and a living classroom for students for research and conservation activities. We faced a few challenges: inconsistent observable taxonomic concepts with cryptic species and poor photo quality. But these and deal breakers, these were the opportunities to strengthen the system. First, comprehensive training on proper documentation techniques and not just the basic ID. And second, regular standardized databases using fixed transacts and quotas, so we can actually compare data year after year. And third, a hybrid monitoring model that combines citizen science enthusiasm with expert validation to fill knowledge gaps and maintain quality control. These strategic improvements don't just fix problems, they make the model more robust, reliable, and scalable for long-term biodiversity monitoring. We have clearly shown that iNaturalist is a powerful tool for ecosystem monitoring when it's used with proper training and methods. It's low cost, easy to scale, and already producing useful data for policy. Citizen science can fill key data gaps, support better conservation systems, and help build strong ecosystems. I want to thank all citizen scientists and my team, school staff, experts, and iNaturalist for making this possible through an open and accessible platform. And thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you to Pasindu for submitting the recording of his presentation, and I hope that you'll all be able to check out the great slides that he prepared as well. So our next presentation is by Chandra Earl, who is here in person. Excellent.
Oh boy. Hi. So hey everyone. I'm Chandra. So I work at Neon, but before I actually started, I was at the Florida Museum for many years. And in our community, we often talk a lot about the extended specimen concept, right? So I got involved in this like small little fun project a few years ago, partly because I happen to be a bug person, but also because I think it's such a neat example of how combining data from multiple sources, including iNaturalist, can help answer a biological question and really frame how researchers are using the extended specimen concept in real life, right? So Corey gave an excellent talk just a couple minutes ago about how people are using iNaturalist data for research. And so this is one of those talks that I'm about to give that is starting to use images in that concept. So this, how do I, oh. These are not my these are not my most recent slides. So that's super fun. All right. Okay, well, there are two major hypotheses for why moths have evolved eye spots. So eye spots are, of course, those big giant spots on the backs of the of moths. We first have the eye mimicry hypothesis, which is the most widely cited explanation. So it proposes that eye spots evolved because they resemble potential enemies of their predators. The alternative here is going to be the conspicuousness hypothesis. And so this view suggests that eye spots are effective just simply because they're big and bright and loud. And so to test whether or not these moth eye spots are just conspicuous marking or true owl mimics, we combined 3 computational approaches using data from a variety of sources. But first things first, let's talk about Automerus real quick. So this is Automerus. And this is the species that we in North America are most familiar with. And all of these pictures that I'm going to be showing are from iNaturalist, FYI. And you can see those big, beautiful eye spots sort of on the back there. So quick side note, I knew that these were supposed to look like owl eyes. I knew that these were supposed to look like owl eyes, but the face of the owl really didn't hit me until I saw it upside down. Upside down. Woo! And so all the photos that I have of these beautiful moths are going to be upside down for that reason. All right. So although this species is pretty common, this specific species is pretty common across North America, this entire genus is actually a South American genus. So that means, of course, it's very highly diverse, and you can very clearly see all of the different colors and sizes of those hindwing eye spots. Right, so to test whether or not Automerus eye spots are just conspicuous markings of true owl mimics, we combined 3 different computational approaches from a variety of sources, a majority of which, of course, being iNaturalist. So first, we were able to use neural networks trained on thousands of iNaturalist photos. Second, we use species distribution modeling to measure range and image overlap. And third, with ancestral trait reconstruction, we mapped eye spot complexity onto a time-calibrated autonomous phylogeny. So the neural networks, we wanted to test whether or not those eye spots are confusable with owl eyes across different levels of model complexity. So we first segmented out thousands of iNaturalist photos. To just the face of the owl and the hind wing of the moths. And then we trained neural network classifiers on these images. And then we asked a question, given an image, is this an owl or a moth? And so what you're seeing here are the confusion matrices for low, average, and high complexity models. And so the green squares are, of course, the correct identifications or the correct classifications, and the red are misclassifications. And so what you can see is that across the three complexities, the networks consistently confuse autonomous eye spots with an average of around 54% accuracy. And that doesn't actually improve when we're adding more complexity to these models. By comparison, we also did include a non-autonomous control species, which doesn't have those big, beautiful eye spots, and it's classified correctly at about 87.5% accuracy. So for species distribution modeling, we set up a simple test of two hypotheses. So if mimicry is operating, the moth-owl species pairs with greater geographic overlap might also show greater visual similarity in the hindwings and the faces. So to evaluate this, we built range models for autonomous using occurrence records from a GBIF and SCAN, which of course also include iNaturalist. The owl ranges we were actually able to get from Birds of the World, which is very, very nice. On the right here are going to be those results. So every single point here is going to be an owl moth species pair. The x-axis shows the range overlap of the two species, and the y-axis shows visual similarity from bioencoder embeddings. And this negative correlation essentially means that as the overlap in species ranges gets higher, the visual differences between images decreases. And lastly, we looked at the evolutionary history of the eye spots themselves. So we encoded two different traits across all the species in the genus. Whether or not an eye spot contained glimmer. So it's going to be, there's little small white dots in the middle of the eye spots that sort of to us represent the reflection of eyes. And how many concentric rings that eye spot is actually made up of. So we use museum specimens, of course, to first sequence and build a dated phylogenetic tree. Then we mapped those traits onto the tree and used ancestral state reconstruction to look at the evolution of those traits. So on the left, we see the tree with glimmer mapped onto it. And you can see that glimmer evolved very early on in the autonomous lineage, around 21 million years ago. And then it was maintained across most of this genus. On the right is going to be the same thing, but for the concentric number of rings, or the number of concentric rings. And so you can see that the ancestor probably had fewer rings, and we could see multiple gains of additional rings across the tree. And so taken all together, these patterns generally suggest that those elaborate eye spots that we're looking at are an evolved trait. So they've been maintained and elaborated on as the genus diversifies. So across all three approaches, we kind of said, hey, our story's consistent here. Our results support that eye spot mimicry is the primary anti-predatory mechanism in autonomous rather than conspicuousness alone. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without all of those images from iNaturalist. And with that, I think my time's done.
Thanks. The next presentation is another virtual one, and I want to draw your attention to the QR code. I think there's, I think it's on some of the tables spread throughout. Allison here is holding up one copy of it. The next presentation is in Spanish, and so if it would be helpful for you to have the automatic translation, please find that QR code and scan it for the next presentation, which is from Beatriz from Colombia. All right. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Since there seems to be an issue with the audio on that video, we are going to skip to the next virtual presentation by Gail. Cross your fingers, everyone.
Why is phenology a good research focus? Phenology. Welcome, I'm Gail, and I'll be speaking to you about the nonprofit Friends of Beaufort Park Native Plant Nursery in Eugene, Oregon. Welcome, I'm Gail, and I'll be speaking to you about the nonprofit Friends of Beaufort Park Native Plant Nursery in Eugene, Oregon. I want to make the case that native plant nurseries are valuable research sites and that phenology research can support the nursery's major goal of producing plants and seeds for habitat restoration. Why is phenology a good research focus? Phenology is a study of the timing of biological events like plant growth, flowering, and seed set, and crucial for understanding seasonal ecological interactions. Also, phenology is easy to record on iNaturalist because it's part of the observation form. Nurseries are ideal because they are distinct sites with many species. They can be accessed by a team of people taking data at different times, and this allows for the creation of large data sets. Our goal was to establish phenology records to inform nursery seed production and identify biological interactions with the surrounding ecosystem. Our case study site is a 2-acre native plant nursery in a county park on the west coast of North America. So how can we acknowledge native plant nurseries as specialized plant communities and valuable research sites? Let's take a look at some example data. We recorded the phenology of over 60 plant species grown in the nursery and can use these data for multiple types of comparisons. We can compare one species over a 5-year period where seed yields are uneven from year to year. And then we can match these data with on-site weather data to start looking for indicators of seed yield. We can also compare growth phases of related species to ask questions about pollinator and predator activity across flowering and fruiting times. Questions like, are there valuable nectar sources throughout the growing season? Are pollinators faithful to one species when 8 species overlap in flowering times? How does this change seed set? Possibilities are endlessly interesting and exciting and in need of research partners. I've talked to you about interactions in the nursery. Let's look outside the boundaries. This nursery is located within a natural area bordered by rivers, agricultural fields, and urban development. We need to start thinking about ecological connections. Many organisms from the surrounding ecosystem use the nursery habitat. Within the nursery, we have recorded over 29 bird species, 150 insect species, and a variety of fungi. These organisms are plant pathogens, predators, and pollinators, each influenced by physical events like weather. All these impact seed quality, diversity, and yield. These seeds then leave the nursery for habitat restoration. So the nursery is not an isolated island habitat. In closing, nurseries are informative research sites. Phenology records can be referred to for nursery management, and nurseries should be recognized as plant communities within an ecosystem. Native plant nurseries are multiplying. This is a recent map of native plant growers and sellers in the United States, showing the potential for a research network. I'd really like to extend a very special thank you to the team of volunteers who have diligently monitored phenology over 6 years and posted over 8,000 observations, and to the power of the community science and iNaturalist for this online platform where it's possible to create a network of native plant nursery sites with accessible data for research and management. So please visit our project on iNaturalist or contact me, Gail Baker, at this email address. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to try and go back to Beatrice's presentation now that we think we've sorted the audio. So if you need that QR code, it's right outside the room. This next presentation is in Spanish.
Compartirles el trabajo titulado iNaturalist como herramienta de ciencia participativa para el conocimiento de la biodiversidad de lepidópteros diurnos urbanos en Colombia. Quien les habla, Beatriz Elena Mojica Figueroa, docente de las Unidades Tecnológicas de Santander, y me acompañó en este trabajo Fabián Andrés Sierra, biólogo de la Universidad Industrial de Santander. La ciencia participativa es una herramienta muy útil que ha sido, pues actualmente ha contribuido muchísimo al conocimiento de la biodiversidad urbana con el auge pues, del Internet, y como lo muestra la diapositiva, según Web of Science, en los últimos años pues se ha incrementado muchísimo el interés y las publicaciones en este tema. En Colombia, el Instituto Humboldt analizó cómo ha sido la participación de los colombianos en el conocimiento de la biodiversidad. Y ustedes saben que hay diferentes fases dentro del proceso de investigación, y evidenciaron que la mayor participación se da con la recolecta de datos. En Colombia contamos con un sistema de información que es el CIP Colombia, y también un reporte muestra cómo plataformas tecnológicas como eBears y iNaturalist están contribuyendo en gran porcentaje a esta información de datos. Como sabemos, pues iNaturalist es creada en Estados Unidos y hay portales personalizados en algunos países. En Colombia, quien administra esta plataforma es el Instituto Humboldt desde el año 2016. Aquí cada país pues lo personaliza. Aquí podemos visualizar la plataforma web de nuestro país. ¿Y esto qué ha permitido? Ha permitido primero pues aumentar grandemente la información de datos respecto a la biodiversidad. Ha permitido que la gente común y corriente se conecte con la naturaleza. Ha permitido crear redes tanto de expertos como de personas aficionadas al conocimiento de la biodiversidad. Esto, pues, a pesar de que Colombia es uno de los países más megadiversos junto con algunos otros de Sudamérica, sin embargo, como vemos acá, pues Sudamérica no es el país que más está utilizando esta plataforma. Y el grupo de interés, pues las mariposas, tampoco es el grupo más registrado en la plataforma. Eh, Sin embargo, pues como bien lo dijimos, el sistema de información en biodiversidad y el GBIF se está alimentando de los datos generados por iNaturalist. El CIF ya cuenta con más de 42 millones de registros con identificadas 80.346 especies y la plataforma de iNaturals pues ya lleva casi 280 millones de registros, de los cuales se han identificado 537.412 y lo más importante que ha logrado que se vinculen en estos registros casi 4 millones de personas en el mundo. En Colombia se logró ya los 2 millones de registros, de los cuales se han identificado 37.586 especies con 58.600 participantes. Esto se ha logrado gracias a eventos de ciencia ciudadana. El más reconocido es el City Nature Challenge, que pues en español el reto naturalista urbano, el cual sabemos pues se viene realizando desde el 2016, inicialmente entre dos ciudades, California y Los Ángeles, y se ha venido dando consecutivamente todos los años. En el último año, pues logró la vinculación de 670 ciudades en el mundo. Colombia se vinculó a este evento a partir del 2018 y mi ciudad, Bucaramanga, venimos vinculándonos desde el 2021 de manera consecutiva, logrando pues una gran información de la biodiversidad de nuestras ciudades. En el último año, como ven acá, el proyecto Sombrilla, participamos 8 ciudades y esa información, pues mucha de ella llega a grado de investigación y está alimentando la plataforma del SIGA. Entonces, en cuestión de los registros de mariposas, eh, se revisó la información del CIF Colombia, del GBIF, donde hay 155.158 registros que pertenecen a 2.493 especies. Eh, Según el checklist del 2022 en Colombia, hay aproximadamente 3.977 especies. Entonces, esto gracias a muchos registros que se han generado en la plataforma de iNatural. Se revisó esta información y se encontró que iNatural está aportando el 27% de los datos de lepidópteros en Colombia. Y en estos momentos estamos revisando qué tan relevantes son estos datos comparados con los que hay en todo el CIF. La familia más registrada, pues es la familia Nymphalidae, seguido de la Hesperidae y Licenidae. También logramos identificar pues las especies más registradas. En el caso de iNaturalist, pues la Anartia matea es arrasa con siendo la especie más registrada, seguida por Anartia jatropa y Danaus plexipus. Como les digo, esta información está siendo analizada con el fin de ser divulgada en un artículo científico. Como conclusiones, pues podemos decir que la plataforma iNaturalist se consolida como la aplicación que está aportando gran información sobre los lepidópteros diurnos urbanos al CIF Colombia, provenientes de eventos de ciencia participativa, principalmente el City Nature Challenge. Las ciudades que se destacan en Colombia con registros provenientes de estos eventos de ciencia ciudadana son Bucaramanga y Medellín, junto a sus áreas metropolitanas. Los datos que se encuentran en esta plataforma son de fácil acceso y son útiles para los tomadores de decisiones para proponer estrategias que incorporan la biodiversidad en la planeación urbana. Sin embargo, pues nos quedan unos retos o cosas por lograr, donde tenemos el fortalecimiento en la identificación a grado de investigación, proponiéndose que se haga a través de los semilleros de investigación de las universidades y colegios, además del apoyo de expertos nacionales e internacionales, creando una red pues, de especialistas. Promover el monitoreo de las mariposas, no solo urbanas, en general, a través de la participación de estos eventos de ciencia ciudadana. Y nos queda todavía pues analizar toda esta información con el fin de que pues conocer un poco más y plantear estrategias de conservación dependiendo del ecosistema. Muchísimas gracias por su atención. Acá les comparto algunas imágenes de las actividades que hacemos durante estos eventos. Este fue un curso dado por un fotógrafo que ha publicado varios libros de mariposas previo a los eventos para tener algunos tips. Estos son imágenes de algunos sitios de la ciudad que fueron aquí es como se visualiza, donde podemos ver varias especies de mariposas, figuran como las especies más registradas, la participación de diferentes actores, como estudiantes de universidades, de colegios, incluso de ejército, la policía tiene grupos ambientales que se han vinculado a estos eventos. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias.
All right, given the logistical difficulty of switching back and forth between the audio systems, we're going to go ahead now with our last virtual presentation. We thought it would be nice to sort of break up the virtual presentations, but it turns out logistically that's just not a great plan. So now the next presentation will be from Patricia from Portugal virtually.
Hello, my name is Patricia Tiago. I'm very sorry I can't be in person with you, but here is my presentation, 15 years of biodiversity for all, building a national citizen science network with iNaturalist. 15 years ago, a simple idea began to take root to create a website where people in Portugal could record the species they observed while going out for their professional or leisure activities, a place where fishermen, farmers, surfers, hikers, divers, municipalities, schools, NGOs, universities, all could record everything they saw anywhere and anytime. Thousands of eyes contributing with information to map and monitor Portuguese biodiversity. The idea started in 2009, and by 2010, Biodiversity for All went online. The mission was simple: to bring people and nature closer together by letting anyone record the biodiversity they saw, from sparrows to orchids, from beetles to whales. For the first 8 years, Biodiversity for All was linked to observado.org, a global platform based in Europe. This gave us a strong foundation to collect biodiversity data and the essential support to develop our national nodes. But something was still missing. We needed stronger interactivity and a friendlier experience to really help the community to grow in Portugal. That happened in 2018, when we became the first European national node of iNaturalist. With iNaturalist, Biodiversity for All became much more interactive and user-friendly, which made it easier than ever to create and strengthen a national community. Now, let's be honest, building a citizen science community in Portugal wasn't easy. Unlike in some countries, Portuguese people don't have a strong naturalist tradition, and combine that with a relatively small territory and population makes what we achieved even more impressive. Today, Biodiversity for All has over 2.6 million observations, more than 23,000 species recorded, around 47,000 observers, and 21,000 identifiers. Some observers have more than 10,000 records each. But beyond numbers, the real treasure is the community, all people discovering and documenting nature together. From city parks to remote island, the platform has become a meeting point between science and society. Over the years, more and more projects have emerged from both the scientific community and the society, which we have been supporting in their implementation and outreach. We have had bioblitzes on green roofs, school projects, scientific expeditions, and plenty of exciting species records. and sometimes surprises, new species, new locations, people who never skip their daily records, retirees who have embraced the cause, and young people who dream of becoming biologists. But to continue growing, we believe it is important to contribute to analyze what we have achieved so far, studying the motivations of users and scientists to participate, understanding data biases and what can be done with the collected information, and identifying which strategies have been most effective in engaging the community. These are some of the scientific questions we have been seeking to help answer. Having a presence in different scientific projects with many partners and interdisciplinary approaches at national, European, and even global levels has helped us make our small contribution to placing citizen science in a prominent position for biodiversity conservation. Our next steps keeps expanding the community, strengthen science policy links, and make sure every observation counts for biodiversity conservation. 15 years of biodiversity for all have shown us that citizen science is not just about data, it's about people, curiosity, and community. Thank you so much for listening, and I would like to give a special thanks to the entire Biodiversity for All team who have made everything possible, the iNaturalist team for welcoming us so warmly and believing in the work we have been doing in Portugal, and the whole community of scientists and citizens who have supported and helped us fulfill our mission.
All right, thanks everyone. And now I'm pleased to introduce our last speaker. We are running a little bit behind, but our last speaker is Tiago.
All right. Is it okay, the audio here? All right. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, everyone. So I'm Tiago. I was formerly a Wikimedian in residence. That's a person that does Wikimedia stuff for organizations at the Biodiversity Heritage Library. I also happen to be a Wikimedia volunteer for a long time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how iNaturalist and Wikipedia and other Wikimedia projects interact. So basically, there's a lot of things between the two platforms. Like they are community-driven, they have volunteers, they have, well, they are nonprofits based in California with global reach. So there are many, many things that tie the two organizations. And Wikimedia has different projects, right? We all know about Wikipedia, but there's Wikidata that organizes a few of the linked data connected to this platform. And there's Wikimedia Commons that hosts images that are used in the other programs. And there are many people that are connecting the data from iNaturalist to these platforms. For example, there's a project called the Wiki Project Biodiversity with many individuals that try and get these things together. But there are many individual volunteers that do this round tripping using tools or going there and downloading images and uploading to Commons and so on. And there's a lot of data round tripping there. So data flows from iNaturalist to Wikimedia Commons or to Wikidata, where it hosts IDs for places, for example, or taxa. These end up feeding into Wikipedia, but all this information goes into iNaturalist back, right? So if you browse iNaturalist, you see species and taxonomic descriptions that come from Wikipedia, and this link between the iNaturalist taxa and Wikipedia goes through Wikidata. So there are connections that are sometimes hidden, but they work in different ways, right? So there are two. So if you use iNaturalist, and I think most people here do use it to some extent, you can bring these images and the metadata associated to them to Wikipedia through different tools. You can search a bit more about this in Google and you will find a different sets. So they fill different niches, but they help you just clicking a button and then getting an image to a Wikipedia ecosystem. And people have been doing this a lot. So as with other talks, we see that the trend is growing. So as data comes to iNaturalist, images come to Wikipedia, you can see the curve. And now there are over 200,000 images that came from iNaturalist, and they are hosted in Wikimedia Commons. And 50,000 of them are used on some wiki. So perhaps on Wikidata, perhaps on English Wikipedia, perhaps in multiple wikis, but 50,000 images are flowing to this big encyclopedia. And these are being seen by people, right? So these are the counts for views by these images by month. So on an average month, images from iNaturalist are seen 20 million times through Wikipedia. So that's a nice impact. It's not perhaps not research, but it's certainly world impact, right? And sometimes these images make to the main page and that did you know session in the English Wikipedia page. And when that happens, they reach out over 150 million views in a single month. So this is a kind of impact that you can get by getting images into iNaturalist and then connecting these into Wikipedia in a sense. So the take-home message, to keep it short, is that if you use some Wikipedia-compatible license on iNaturalist, like CC0 or CC BY or CC BY SA, eventually this information will come to Wikipedia. You can do it yourself and get this info there, but if you just use an OMPA license, there's a very active community of people that will make this transition and help fill the gaps in biodiversity imagery, right? And that's basically it. Thank you all. So this is a QR code for the Wiki project Biodiversity. So there we have all the resources and connect the different people. There is a Telegram group that we chat almost on a daily basis. So there are different resources that you can get into and share questions. And as a plug, tomorrow we'll have a Wikimedia and biodiversity data session. There will be some iNaturalist things there, but a lot of Wikimedia things. So if you're interested in more, you can join us tomorrow too. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Tiago. So I'm going to ask our speakers who are here to come up and have a seat. And so that's you, Corey. And yeah, I'm not going to sit because oh, you've got another microphone. Excellent. Okay, great. I thought I was going to have to run around the audience and get to your questions, but seems like no. Go ahead, Corey. No, I'm standing. Great, but I'm glad we've got someone who can, I want to, since we're a little short on time, I want to turn it over to your questions, like I promised, since we did not have questions throughout. So if you've got a question for someone up here, please raise your hand, and we've got a second mic that we can bring to you so that everyone can hear your question.
So, hi, so thank you for your presentation. Oh, okay, so I would like to ask a question concerning the models. So somewhere you talked about you develop models. So what kind of models? Is it species identification, occupancy, and such thing? So the other thing is the data that is on iNaturalist open, and can one access it and maybe use to train models?
Great. So just to repeat the question to make sure that I understood it, you're asking, you want to know more about the models that iNaturalist uses and more about how to access and how you can use the data. Yeah? Okay, so to answer the first question about the modeling that iNaturalist does, there's two key models that we use right now. One is visual similarity, and that is using the combination of images and identifications, millions of them, that we use for about 100,000 species to train a model that says, you know, based on all of these images, all of these identifications, give it an image, what are the most visually similar taxa? But since we know that sometimes you can have two species that look very similar, but have completely non-overlapping distributions, that geospatial component is also important. So separately, though at the same time, we also train a geospatial model on the points and the identifications. And we then, in the iNaturalist platform, combine the results of those two things when you're making an observation when you give it the coordinates. We use both of those pieces of data to give you predictions of the most likely species. In terms of data accessibility, I maybe want to invite Corey to answer that question because he has accessed A lot of iNat data? Or just data about iNaturalist data?
Yeah, well, both. Yeah, I mean, all the data are accessible. Yes. The best place to get data from that I think we would agree to encourage people would be GBIF. But that does not get you the data for every question that there is. So it's a complicated question. And then there's like licensing issues as well that are baked into that. There's also like images. There's an open source, Amazon AWS bucket for images. I don't know. That's a tough question.
I am remembering that Corey came to me a couple months ago and said, Carrie, we should write a paper that talks people through all the different ways you can access iNaturalist data and works through different scenarios. Like if you're really interested in image data, you should go this way. And if you're really interested in occurrence data, you should go this way. So I guess stay tuned. We really need to get together and write that paper.
Sorry, just adding on real quick. I feel like all of this is very much a topic that goes into the extended specimen concept, right? We're talking a lot about all these disparate data sources, and we really need to bring these together somehow so that we're not trying to do this like go to these different data sources, blah, 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 or at least making it easier to do so without having prior knowledge. And so I don't know, I encourage you all to think about how how we can logistically and technologically and infrastructurally get the extended specimen concept in this way.
Yeah, just to complement that, so an plug to the iNaturalist API is actually well documented, the REST API. So you can access the data, get the information. All these different tools that connect iNat and Wikimedia, they use the REST API in some way. And it's way more better documented than the Wikimedia APIs. So there are good ways to access data. That could be better documentation, but there always can be better documentation, right? But it's open as one would hope so.
And just to clarify, the reason why there's not necessarily just one answer to how you should access iNaturalist data is because it gets very different at different scales. So if you're looking for just data on one rarely observed species, you can easily export a CSV of that information directly from iNaturalist. If it is data that has been shared with GBIF, we encourage you to get that information from GBIF. But if you want millions of images because you want to train an image recognition model, we're going to point you to our Amazon open data set, which is where we host most of our images. So that's why there's unfortunately not a one size fits all answer. There's also the API like Tiago mentioned, and it really depends on the use case for the data, how we'll suggest you access it, which is why we should write that paper. Other questions?
Muy buenos días para todos. Mi nombre es Oscar Gómez Castro, desde el centro del departamento del Cesar, Corredor de Vida de Colombia, representante de la Fundación Social para la Conservación de la Cultura y Riquezas Naturales Jaguatur. Hago parte de la red de monitoreo del departamento del Cesar. Muchas gracias por sus intervenciones. Hemos aprendido muchísimo en este importante escenario. Una de las preguntas que quería abordar es cómo podríamos, como organización, ya que operamos en la majestuosa serranía del Perijá, donde existe una riqueza de biodiversidad enorme, cómo podríamos montar a esta plataforma imágenes que continuamente estamos registrando en los recorridos que hacemos de turismo comunitario en nuestro territorio.
So maybe do you want me to translate? Yeah.
Yes, please.
So they are working in a region which is called Corredor de Vida del Cesar, and in Colombia, especially in a mountain which is called Perija, and they want to know how to mount images of biodiversity, how they could collaborate with iNaturalist and to start putting images in the platform.
Great. So maybe I can answer and then you can translate in that you can translate as well. So in Colombia, we have a long history of working with Instituto Humboldt. And so if you aren't connected with them already, I definitely encourage you to talk to them, since they have a lot of experience working with different groups around Colombia and helping them figure out what makes the most sense for how to use iNaturalist in their communities. So I think that's my #1 recommendation.
And okay. They got traduction simultaneously.
Okay, great. Glad that's working. Other questions?
Thank you, everyone, for great presentations. For example, recreational divers data in iNaturalist, because it seems to me like half of the recreational divers nowadays have a GoPro with them. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. How can we encourage more marine observations, given that it's a relative deficit in iNaturalist? Actually, Allison, are you willing to speak to this? I feel like you've had the most recent conversations with a group that is interested in doing incorporating iNaturalist into their diving courses.
Yeah, so there is going to be a course released through Scuba Diving International that is about, it's about both underwater photography and then how to get those observations into iNaturalist. And the hope is that the person who's designing this course teaches in one area for Scuba Diving International, but they have a team of schools globally. And so the hope is that they will train other teachers to also hold this course for Scuba Diving International. And I have had some conversations with some of the engineers on iNaturalist about the fact that a lot of divers are taking video and not necessarily photos. So is there something that we potentially could do on the iNat side that would actually help extract images from video, because we only accept images, not video on iNaturalist, to also help divers post observations to iNaturalist?
Arthur Chapman from Australia. Following on from that response then, why doesn't iNaturalist include video?
Why doesn't iNaturalist include video? It is a huge amount of data and it's a moderation nightmare. So maybe video will be in our future, but it's not in our immediate future for those reasons. A lot more data storage would be required and a lot more attention to moderation. Unfortunately, if you let people post videos on the internet, there's all kinds of incentive for people to post bad things in there.
But just back to the marine deficit. I mean, I think a really important point here is like it takes time, and there's quite a few apps out there for the marine world, and different like programs and platforms. I think it just takes time. Like, I don't know. And these guys can't do it all. So I think that's why like it has to be at some level, some grassroots kind of movements, and just having people out there like talking with dive shops, talking with divers. But I fully agree. Like there's so many photos that are taken from divers that just don't make it anywhere.
Yeah, sorry, just talking about cutting edge technology. I know the diving world is getting into like 360 cameras as well. So we're talking about videos, but now, okay, how do we talk about, like, think about, larger than that? What is the future there? Just thoughts.
But a question about 360 video. Yeah, maybe we need better tools for helping people extract individual observations from video. How are we on time? We have 5 more minutes for questions. Oh, there's a couple hands back there.
Hello, Gareth Thomas from the UK. Corey, one for yourself very quickly. I will have a look at the paper, which looks fascinating. For the different metrics, and I guess impact metrics that you were looking at for iNaturalist, do you have a breakdown of those per country?
Yes. So we tag every article that we tagged, all 2,137 are available in our how we coded them is available. So like you could filter by country and then get a list of like those papers that are included in our data set from that country. Some of them are more than one country and like it becomes complicated, but in general, yes. Yeah.
Going back to the divers again, I'm a diver. I'm not really an underwater photographer, but I had some trips, and my friend, he took a lot of pictures. I said, okay, give the pictures to me. I'm gonna set them up. I'm gonna place them on iNaturalist, which I did, but it took me an enormous amount of time. And one of the things is that you're underwater, your GPS location is not always like very accurate. And then you have a bunch of photos and you want to align your picture with the dive spot. And it was fun to do it one time and maybe another time. But I do understand that it's still a hurdle for just, how do you say that, fun divers or people who just go out, take their pictures and have to put them. So making it easier would improve the thing big time, I think.
Yeah, it is a challenge to connect when you don't have that geotag already in your photos. That can be a real challenge. Something that I've done when snorkeling is leave a track running on my phone on the boat. It's if the phone stays on the surface, yeah, then it can keep the track. One important thing to note is that when you are uploading a lot of observations, this is especially useful. You can put a radius of uncertainty around observations, and so for something like diving, I think the best shot is to try and locate it on the map and then put a radius that you think is appropriate to cover all of those observations. Rebecca, is yours on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's touching a few different topics, but.
I love iNaturalist very much. I do it the whole time. I'm a diver.
It's still a big barrier.
Yeah, there also is the batch upload. You can edit all of the location and all the photos that you've uploaded at one time. So that makes it a little faster. Yeah. I mean, it's not a perfect solution. I had a couple of questions. Corey, I was going to ask you about the huge amount of effort that you all put into tagging all these papers. Like, I wonder if, especially on iNat or GBIF, since we have access to those folks here, if there's a way to encourage a standardization that people could use a keyword or something that then we could sort later to keep this going.
I mean, so GBIF is easy. It's kind of already solved by and large. iNaturalist is super difficult. No, that came out weird. But the problem you allude to is very difficult, and I really don't know. I've thought about this, but I don't have a good answer, except for like maybe LLMs for some smart computer science person that can like you just basically trawl through Google Scholar, get all the PDFs, and then pipe them through. And in theory, we have a training data set already built, but that's only on these like 8 categories that we already debated about. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really tough problem, I think.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing I wanted to add about the marine data is, my name is Rebecca. I work at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, and I've run a marine community science campaign in California for over 10 years. It's mostly coastal, so it's not underwater necessarily, although we do engage divers and other folks who do get underwater. But it's kind of like people have mentioned, it started as a campaign, and it's really important to connect to people and give them a reason to collect these data and reach out and build the community around the collected data. Like you heard from Beatrice about the City Nature Challenge, it's like giving people a reason and building that community that collects that data. Those data in that place is the best way to collect data in places that you don't have them.
It was mentioned the issue of georeferencing for diving and snorkeling, etc. In the georeferencing best practices document that John Majoric and I wrote for GBIF, there are sections in there recommending methods of how to record some of that and how to record your uncertainty. And if anybody's got any issues, people that are doing it a lot and have different ideas, then please put something on in the GitHub on that page, and we can add more to it because that's a living document. So
thanks for that comment, Art. I think we are just about at time now. So I wanted to thank you all for your attention and attendance today, and draw your attention. We do have an iNaturalist booth out there that's got some fun goodies. So be sure to stop by. And there are also many other presentations, like Tiago mentioned, that that are incorporating iNaturalist somehow. So I hope to see you for the rest of the week. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your lunch.